I just want to thank so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Christina Hildebrand. I coordinate this event amongst many other things. Thank you. This is our second year, and it's exciting for me because I see it going forward. We have the most amazing speakers, and I thank all of the speakers that are here tonight and have, offered up their time this weekend. Our keynote speaker is Jeffrey Smith. He lives locally and has, offered to come and give our keynote. And so last year, for those of you who were here last year, we had Chris Exley, who is a top aluminum researcher. I feel like he jumped off of this platform into the world. And this year, I chose, me, and I also want to thank the volunteers that have helped me through the past 6 months. There are 5 of you. I'm not going to name you, but there are 5 of you. You know who you are, and you've been amazing. But this year, we chose food for life as our topic, sort of our subtopic. And every year with LiveAware, we're going to choose a different subtopic, and we'll probably circle back to others in the future. But this year, we chose food for life before the whole glyphosate issue sort of blew up with the lawsuit. For those of you who are not aware, there was a lawsuit that was came before a jury in August, where a groundskeeper from a school had gotten cancer from glyphosate and from spraying Roundup in the school, and he received $289 million in payments. And so that kind of was just like, okay, we chose the right topic for this year. And when I was looking at, who I wanted to speak, one of the things is I want somebody who's really at the cusp of this and really, knows what they're talking about. And Jeffrey was my person. And I reached out to him and I was just like, I don't know. Yeah, I reach for the stars at this. I reach for the people that I'm just like, I really want these people to show up. And amazingly, these 2 years, those people have shown up. So I'm a big believer in the people show up, the speakers show up, and whoever shows up, the right people are here. So I truly believe that. And so I asked Jeffrey, and he lives locally, thankfully. And he was like, I'll come and speak at the dinner. So I really am excited. One of the other things that hopefully those of you who have gone to the talks today have noticed is that one of the focuses we have is not just the fear part or here's all the toxicity in your life, but is the solution and being able to find things that you can make changes in your home, and you can make the changes that really will make a difference. And it doesn't need to be everything all at once. It just needs to be one thing at a time and moving forward, making that change, integrating it into your life, and then moving on to the next thing. And so one of the things that Jeffrey is known for is sort of the how do we solve this? How do you do this in your life? And so I'm really excited to have him speak. So warm welcome to Jeffrey Smith, who will be talking about.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. How many others of you are local or Bay Area? My friends, my neighbors. All right, who gets the award for traveling from the greatest distance? Yes, from where? New Zealand. Australia. Huh? Switzerland. This is amazing. Let's give a hand for those people that flew in. Yeah, I was talking to Andre, who spoke, and he flew in last night, and he flies out back to Australia tomorrow to be here. That's remarkable. I drove an hour and 17 minutes. I'd like to ask you, how many people have been concerned about eating GMOs? Raise your hand. And how many people are generally like eating organic? Raise your hand. All right, so this is a tougher question. I want you to rate yourself from 1 to 100 how vigilant you've been at eating organic. And that includes going out to eat. It includes eating at friends' houses. So it's 1 score for your whole lifestyle. And I want you to be honest, even though I'm going to be asking you to be raising your hand depending on what your number is. 1 to 100. 100 is like only organic, never anything other ones. So how many people are like 1 to 20 in the lower category? Raise your hand. Bold, be strong. 1, okay. 2, 3, okay. How many are in the 20 to 40 range? All right, thank you. 40 to 60? 60 to 80? 80 to 100. All right. So it's skewed as a kind of an upside-down pyramid. How many people saw the film Secret Ingredients last night? Wow. And how many people who saw the film changed the number of their lives going forward, meaning they're going to change their amount of organic? Beautiful. And thank you. I find that the people who don't change their number are usually those that are at the 100% already. But they just said, I want to copy this so that I get everyone else who's been running away from me as I talk about food. I want them to see the film. How do people have people running away from you because you're a foodie and you talk about it a lot? I understand. So, I want to know, when you switch to a non-GMO and organic diet, how many people noticed an improvement in health? All right, what kind of symptoms got better? Migraines. Anyone else with headaches? Pain in general? Pain? What? Inflammation. Okay, that's like anything. You know, it's like it's inflammation. You know, you have an argument. Inflammation. How many people noticed a reduction in inflammation? Okay, I had one woman in the back of a big room shout out, erectile dysfunction. I didn't miss a beat. I said, okay, raise your hand if you had erectile dysfunction. Another symptom. Brain fog. What was that? Sorry. Brain fog. Oh my God, so many people. How many people improved their brain fog? Yeah. All right. What else?
My son's throat swelled shut.
His throat swelled shut on non-GMO and organic?
If he eats non-GMO food.
If he eats non-GMO food. No, if he eats GMO food.
Well, if he eats GMO food.
GMO food.
So he has to eat non-GMO.
Oh, okay. You had me thinking like, this is. I'm in the wrong business.
No. Brain fog.
So his throat swells shut. That is so scary.
No, he almost died a couple.
Which types of food? Is it corn or soy or?
Number one was wheat.
See, wheat is not GMO, but wheat is sprayed with Roundup. Yeah.
So he's allergic to the Roundup. But
Yeah.
also milk.
Milk. Okay, so yeah. So there's allergies in there, not just GMO, but also, so they're non-organic. How many people notice that they can eat in Europe things that they can't eat in the United States? Yes. That's so common. So I've asked this question. Anyone else, like, they want to share a symptom like this? Like,
your gut.
Your gut, okay. How many people notice improvement in digestion when they switch to organic and non-GMO? So thank you for bringing that up, Andre, because in the 150 lectures that I've asked this question, that's always the number one response. You know, and there's usually a larger number of people, so it makes it an easier thing to determine, but it's absolutely the case. Digestion is number one. How many people noticed increased energy? All right? Increased energy and reduced brain fog. I put them together. So it was number two. And so we actually did a survey, and there's so much evidence now. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I'm going to share some of that evidence. And we understand now why these things are getting better. And I'm going to share with you some of the things why. But let me, first of all, Secret Ingredients. If you did see it, I wasn't there. You can applaud now. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. No, really. It'll be available soon. We're getting the last aspects of the website together, so you'll have an opportunity to see it if you haven't, and to share it with friends if you've seen it. Okay, so what I did is I published a peer-reviewed article in the International Journal of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, which was based on a survey of 3,256 people who reported getting better in 28 different conditions when they switched to a non-GMO and largely organic diet. You can all read that, right? Really? I can't. Digestion. 85% of the people who reported improvements in anything reported improvements in digestion. Ridiculous. And in fact, the article, 1/3 of the article is all about why that might be the case. Then there's fatigue, overweight, brain fog, anxiety and depression, food allergies and sensitivities, memory and concentration, and we're still at 48%. And then there's joint pain, seasonal allergies, gluten sensitivity, insomnia, other skin conditions besides eczema, hormonal problems, musculoskeletal, that's 25% and up. Then autoimmune disease, eczema, high blood pressure, asthma, menstrual, diabetes, other mental disorders besides anxiety and depression, underweight, cancer, kidney disease, infertility, autism, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. So this was amazing, and it turns out there's very good reason why these particular diseases and disorders are likely to be affected from GMOs and Roundup. And there's basically, I look at 3 different aspects of GMOs. There's more. I wrote a 320-page book on all these different reasons, but if we just look at 3, the nature of the GMOs and what it does, the Bt toxin, and the Roundup. So let me first bring everyone up to speed what a GMO is. Okay, it used to be very easy to say they'd take a gene from one species and force it into the DNA of another species. Now they have another type of GMO called gene editing. And they're trying to say, it's not a GMO. Don't believe them. It's a genetically engineered product. It has, and one of the aspects of GMOs is the number one. Is that a recorder, by the way? Let's not record this. Then I can speak more freely. Yeah. If I know I'm recording, it's like, I gotta play, I gotta make friends with my inner attorney.
Jeffrey, we're recording it, but it can be edited.
Oh, you're recording it.
We're recording
Oh.
it. So Jeffrey, you get to edit it as whatever you
Oh, I'm never going to read. I don't even watch documentaries that I'm in. There was an Australian film crew that came out and interviewed me, and it was a prime time thing, and they sent me this DVD, and it was in a little package, and it stayed in that package, and it's still in that package from 2006.
I'm the same way, Jeffrey. I cannot look at myself.
Well, I don't mind looking at myself. I just don't have time. You know, Gary Null did a like an hour and a half long documentary, and I think I'm in like 30 or 40 minutes of it. And I finally got to 15 minutes, and then I said, okay, I'm busy. And then I finally watched another 15 minutes. That's all. I've watched 30 minutes of that documentary. I like Gary. Someday I will see the documentary that I'm in. So I probably, Christine, I'm not going to edit the video. But no, it's okay. I haven't said anything bad, have I? I haven't said anything. It's like, all right, let me just review. Okay, fine, we're okay. You can just run with it. All right. So what we're seeing is that all these people are getting better, and they're describing it. See, originally, I learned all about the health dangers, traveled around the world. There was about 25 countries at that point. I had written Seeds of Deception, and I started working on, and I was nearly done with the book Genetic Roulette. And that documented all the different things that could go wrong. And then I got an invitation from the naturopath conference, 700 naturopaths. And I thought, oh, maybe I should do a PowerPoint. I had never done a PowerPoint before. And then I got an invitation to the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, and there's been dozens of doctors groups now. But I remember going to the environmental medicine group, and I talked to them because they had a theme, and it was GMOs. I think it was allergies, and so I culled all the information about allergies and gave the talk. And the next year was a different disease, so I came back and did a thing. And I was just speaking to them each year, and people would come up to me and say, Jeffrey, I can tell when I eat a GMO. And I'm like, oh, really? And I would ask the questions, and they never really did it. And I was like, I'm kind of skeptical. And I didn't tell them that. And it was crazy because I was traveling all around the world. I was the leading spokesperson in the world on the health dangers of GMOs. I was talking about Dr. Pustai's rats that got damaged in 10 days. And people are telling me they can tell the difference. And I said, in my mind, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm thinking it might be more of like a background trend. Like that you look at the epidemiology, there's some kind of increase. But when I started telling the doctors. I won an award from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine and like 3 years after I was giving talks there, and I came back with a video camera to interview the doctors. And I had always been representing the scientists. Any scientists here? All right, I'm going to make fun of you. Just good. So, it's like converging lines of evidence suggest that I might be chilly. Nothing definite. Always like might be, could be, should, it's always sort of circumspect because very few things are proven. And so I was very carefully representing the scientists. But these doctors who I interviewed did not speak like scientists. They said, GMOs cause inflammation. One allergist said, my patients that eat GMOs have more allergies. And they'll tell you that. One woman said, all my patients, I put on non-GMO, and they all get better. I went, what? And I said, I was skeptical. I said, what percentage? She said, I told you all, 100%. All right, 98%. I said, how many patients do you have? And then she took about a minute and calculated it and looked up and said about 5,000. So I said, can I go to your office and interview the patients? She said, sure. So I went with the film crew, interviewed the patients. A woman who was 28 days into the diet. Her Crohn's disease symptoms disappeared after day 3. She had lost some huge amount of weight. Her skin condition was clearing up. Another person was sentenced to 6 pills a day for the rest of her life for irritable bowel. 6 weeks into the diet, she didn't need it anymore. Another woman, 3 weeks. A child who had gut-wrenching pain was gone. Now, some of these people were also taken off of gluten, taken off of dairy, taken off of processed foods, and so who knew? I started going to the farms, and I asked the farmers who had switched their pigs to non-GMO. And it wasn't even organic, and they weren't gluten-free pigs. They didn't have dairy-free cows. So it was... Sorry, we're not into this stuff. But we'll take the soy milk, thank you. So what happened was the farmers were describing the same improvements that the people were describing in the clinics. No more diarrhea for the pigs. No more Crohn's disease, irritable bowel for the humans. Every farmer, Andre, you're going to enjoy this. Andre is like one of the top spokespeople in the planet for organic, the longest serving president of the International Federation of Organic AMs. Agricultural iPhone. Let's give a hand to Andre. He flew in from Australia yesterday. He flies out tomorrow. I don't envy you. So I want to tell you, Andre, all of the farmers, everywhere I interviewed them, whether it was cows or pigs, when they switched their animals to non-GMO, they all used one very technical term in describing the animals. They said they're happier. And they didn't hear each other, they just said it. And like cows are social animals, and some cows, when they were on the GMOs, they became unsocial, and they became agitated, and they became social again. I got into a shuttle one year. I was going to a conference in Washington State, and there was a guy who recognized me, started talking, and he said, I got to tell you this story. I got a call from one of my clients. I'm a consultant for farms, and the guy was like stuttering, and he said, I was hardly coherent. And he said, remember you told me not to use GMOs, and he goes, oh my God. He had recommended no GMOs. He thought that the guy switched and had a problem. Well, what eventually came out was 11 days earlier, he had put his pigs on non-GMO corn. And about 2 or 3 days into it, he was walking with his brother, and the guy that had called was in charge of the nursery, 3,000 pigs. And they were walking along, and they noticed that the pigs were acting different. And one of them joked and said, it's probably that non-GMO corn, and they laughed and they kept walking. But by day 11, something dramatic had happened. 14 years earlier, prior to that, his brothers had said, oh, he's got the easiest job on the farm. I don't know how 3,000 piglets are the easiest job, but for some reason it was the easiest job on the farm, and they'd always chide him about it. But for the last 14 years, it was not the easiest job because the pigs were always sick. He was injecting them constantly, and they also were sickly. It used to be that when they brought in the food, they'd be up and they'd be acting like piglets, and then they'd be like that the whole time. Now they were just lying down all the time. They'd get up when they came in, but they'd be lying down before they left the pen. And so for 14 years, he blamed it on the new genetics, the different pigs that came in. He said, we had pigs coming in from Canada, so they were blaming it on Canadian bacon. So he said, what happened over those 11 days is that the piglets returned to normal. That their energy came back. And their need for the injections already had dropped, and ultimately it was a 75% reduction in the need for injections. So we had these experience with the farmers, and then we heard from pets. How many people have a dog or cat? Go to petsandgmos.com tonight or tomorrow and watch the 10-minute film of these great veterinarians and pet owners who put their pets on organic food, and what got better. So we have the farmers and the veterinarians from livestock, and the pet owners and the veterinarians from pets. And we have the doctors and the patients all saying the same thing. It's not always these 28, because sometimes, you're not going to get these type of diagnoses in a cow. But you get these general categories. And if you look at the animal feeding studies, the animals are suffering from the precursors to these diseases, or actually the full disease. So we have humans, animals, both the livestock and the pets, and the lab animals, all pointing to the same nexus. And this is not trivial. The average American eats more than their own weight in GMOs every year. Now, the GMO itself has all sorts of unpredicted side effects. It can create allergens and toxins and new diseases. We could talk about that for an hour. The corn produces a toxin, insecticide, which breaks open little holes in the walls of insects to kill them. And it breaks open the same type of hole in human cells in high concentrations in laboratories. And then the Roundup, most GMOs, 80%, are Roundup ready, designed to be sprayed with Roundup herbicide. Roundup has all sorts of horrible, nasty problems. And we can go into it. It's really dangerous. And if we look at just these three, we could explain all these 28. Just the properties, just what we know about the modes of action of those three. Now, in addition to this pattern, if it's really serious, we should see changes in the population. And that's what we're seeing. Changes in the population along similar lines. And I'm going to show you charts. I think I'm at the chart section now. Yes. Is this a laser? Yes. This is glyphosate. How many people do not know what glyphosate is? 2. You're kind of scared. Everyone else knows what it is. It's okay. Like 10 days ago, like a year ago, almost no one knew it. It went very, very obscure for most humans. It's the active ingredient in Roundup herbicide. So it's a carcinogen, an antibiotic. It chelates minerals. It damages the mitochondria. It messes up our hormones. It damages the digestive tract. It creates leaky gut. And it's in our food. And it's not only sprayed on Roundup-ready crops, it's sprayed on the cereals. Wheat, barley. One of the largest amounts of glyphosate in our food supply is oats. It's also in legumes. It's on lentils. It's on mung beans. It's also in potato fields. It's in potatoes and sweet potatoes and citrus, in wine. It's all over the place. But it's highly concentrated in the Roundup-ready crops. And here is the amount of glyphosate-based herbicides sprayed on Roundup-ready soy and corn, which were introduced right here. And these vertical bars are the hospital discharge diagnosis of inflammatory bowel disease. We talked about digestive disorders as the number one. And if we just look at this, digestive, what did we just say about Roundup? It causes leaky gut, gaps in the walls of the intestines, which are, by the way, not just linked to digestive disorders. It's linked to inflammation, which links to every other disorder, practically. It links to autoimmune disease, higher cancer rates, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, celiac disease. It's also an antibiotic, and it preferentially kills the beneficial bacteria, the stuff we pay for, like lactobacillus that's in yogurt. And it doesn't kill easily the pathogens like salmonella and botulism and E. coli. And when that overgrows, that's linked to, some say, all the diseases. So whether it's leaky gut or a faulty microbiome, which is the gut bacteria and organisms, just those two can explain lots of diseases. But it also suppresses digestive enzymes. It also damages the little fingers on the sides of the intestines called microvilli, which do the absorption of the food. It changes the mineral ability to absorb some of that gut bacteria, by the way. Produces the precursors to serotonin and dopamine and melatonin. And the way that it does it is a particular pathway that glyphosate shuts down. So there's a lot, and we can go drilling down. We could spend hours on just glyphosate. But I want to show you these charts. And I just want you to look at the slope. Sometimes it'll be glyphosate alone. Sometimes you'll see two lines, which is the percentage of GMOs in the soy and corn fields in the United States. I will read the name of the diagnosis, and you just look at the slope. And that way, you get to, and we're going to do this quickly because there's a lot of them. And this is for some of people who haven't seen this, is sobering. Deaths due to intestinal infection. Peritonitis, which is an inflammatory digestive disorder. Bile duct and liver cancer. That's a trend line there. This is age adjusted, and that's just what it would have been had there been no other influence at this point. Kidney and pelvic cancer. Urinary and bladder cancer. Thyroid cancer. Deaths due to acute myeloid leukemia. Renal failure, kidney failure, death. Kidney injury. Discharge from hepatitis C. Autism prevalence in 6-year-olds. Now, if this were, that should be a 0.9972. If it were a 1, it would have been a perfect line. So it's not perfect, it's only 0.9972. Diabetes. Again, that's the trend. Deaths due to stroke, dementia, deaths from senile dementia, Alzheimer's, deaths from Parkinson's, deaths from obesity, deaths due to hypertension, anemia, insomnia, sleep disorders, celiac disease, congenital birth defects, lipoprotein metabolism disorder deaths, anxiety, suicide by overdose, schizophrenia, ADHD. Pretty sobering. Now, correlation does not mean causation. What that means is just because those lines move together does not mean A causes B. It doesn't have to be related at all. But when you know what we described earlier, that the modes of action actually would predict these. And you know that when you take people off of GMOs and Roundup, they get better from these things. Then this is something to pay attention to. Are there any questions about any of these diseases as to why one of them might be related to GMOs or Bt toxin or Roundup? Because I want to go into that, but did anything stick out to you? Say, how is it possible that the food could be related to that particular disorder? Yeah. The lipid protein metabolism, I don't know because I don't understand what that is. This was work done by Stephanie Seneff, and you could find out the information there. She has some very interesting theories. They need to be supported by some empirical data, but some very interesting theories because she looks at all of the biochemistry. It gets very, very complicated very quickly. You can go on YouTube and just Google my name and her name, and you'll see I translate science. So we have about an hour and 5 minutes, about 200,000 views. So she talks about, this is early in her, no one knew her at that point, early in her expose career. And it's very interesting how she's a PhD researcher at MIT. And she's an expert at big data and how to pull that off the net and analyze it. And she pulled off all the data on autism. And she could understand, which means all the different physiological changes, what's low, what's high in the autistic body. And she could predict clearly why the children or the autistic people have the particular symptoms based on the physiological changes. But she couldn't figure out the environmental toxin that created those changes. So she pulled all the big data on all the different chemicals. And nothing fit. But she'd never even heard of glyphosate. She went to a lecture by another friend of mine, Dr. Don Huber, a professor emeritus from Purdue, and she said to me, I sat on the edge of my chair for 2 hours because everything he said fit hand in glove. And she's convinced that glyphosate is one of the drivers, if not the major driver for autism. Yeah?
Is it exposure to the child or exposure to the mother or the father?
Well, you know, that particular study, the graph, it was autistic prevalence in 6-year-olds. And what they did is they figured by the time the child is 6, they've been exposed since they were a child through the food and through the breast milk. But they decided, because of the amount of availability and all that, to run the previous 4 years of glyphosate. That year and the previous 3 years. And so it was 4-year total. And that 4-year total made the slope tighter, which makes sense because it's the accumulation of exposure. Now, there is glyphosate in breast milk according to some studies. Another study tried to refute it. I always question the refuting type, because they often have high thresholds of detection on purpose. But it was discovered in some using an ELISA test. And it's also, it affects the gut bacteria of the mother. So the way that a child gets inoculated for their microbiome is through the vaginal canal during a normal birth. And if there's a cesarean, they get a whole different microbiome, and they become susceptible for different diseases through their life. So there's now some doctors that are taking the vaginal microbiome and applying it to the cesarean section with success. Andre, did you have a comment on that?
If you don't mind, I'm actually one of the co-authors of some.
Oh, that's right. You were a co-author. That's right. I remember that. Here, give him the microphone, man. I'll sit down.
No. I just want to answer the one about autism. Firstly, if you see these numbers up there, these are called Pearson's correlation coefficients, used by statisticians to determine the probability that these are linked. Because, as Jeffrey said, causation isn't. Correlation is not causation. However, in these ones, we actually found, when we published them, the fact that they could be an accident, they're not related, is 1 in 10,000. There is a study out now that just came out just recently showing how glyphosate causes autism and other diseases. It's a neurotoxin. It actually stops the normal development of nerve cells. So these nerve cells don't develop the dendrites and axons, which are the connections to other nerve cells, that they should. And so we've gone from correlation to now that we actually know the biochemical pathway that small amounts of glyphosate, in this case we're talking about parts per billion, and parts per billion is what most of us will have in our urine, in our blood, and we know where there's independent testing that will be in breast milk and will cross the placenta. The only testing that doesn't seem to find it is the testing by the pesticide companies. Surprise, surprise.
Amazing. How did that happen? It's like in aspartame, which comes from a GMO, there was about 400 studies on aspartame, and half of them showed no problem, and half of them showed there was serious problems, and the half that showed no problem was all done by industry. And every single one that was independent showed problems. So what I want to do now is I want to take us to the next step. If you have a pressing question, I'll take it. But so this is important. I'm glad you brought this up, because where we're going, what you're highlighting is, this does not mean that glyphosate is the sole cause. We have a background noise of all these different toxins. And they've been chlorinating the water for long before Roundup was introduced. And it has its own trend that's already there. And so do other toxins. What this is showing is how it may be boosted up. When you add the glyphosate, when you add the Roundup Ready crops in 1996, and then things start going, it doesn't mean that the other things aren't also supporting it. And one of the articles that was written by Stephanie Seneff and Anthony Samsel was showing how the P450 cytochrome pathway in the body is messed up. That's the technical term. And what it does, it has certain enzymes that help the liver detox. And if you are causing the liver to be less effective at detoxing, that means all of the other toxins that you mentioned and all the other toxins out there that are normally conveyed out of the body by the liver can become amplified if that detox pathway is damaged. So you end up in a situation where it becomes like the master key. Like it's like letting all of the prisoners out of the prison. Because before, the liver took them out. But now they're free to scavenge around the body because the liver, or wherever they go from the liver, someone else knows here, but I don't.
Ammonia and bleach causes liver cancer too.
Right. So these other things will cause, these other things will cause cancer, but we're looking to see an additional boosting effect. And, if other things were also introduced at that time, then that would be a very strong potential co-founding factor. So it means, oh no, maybe it wasn't glyphosate, maybe it was that. So I'm not saying that glyphosate causes all of these things. I'm saying that, but if you look at the pattern, that people get better from these things when they stop eating, same with the animals, that the animals force-fed it and under conditions where both animals are getting the same diet, and the one that's eating the GMOs or exposed to Roundup has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at levels of glyphosate that are 437,500 times smaller than the amount that the EPA allows in our drinking water or to be consumed on a per day and a per body weight basis. When we look at the specific disorders associated with it, there's enough evidence to look at these numbers, in my opinion, to say, wow, Roundup and GMOs may be contributing to this big jump. Not definite. And the thing is, that's
One chemical with another one.
exactly.
Cancer right there.
Exactly. There's something that in Roundup Ready corn, there's higher levels. By the way, the process of genetic engineering causes all sorts of changes in the DNA, and they express different levels of proteins and whatnot. And they say, oh, it's just it's like splicing in a page into a book. Yeah, if you take a machine gun and you machine gun the rest of the book, and then move things around, and says, yeah, it's the same thing, really. So they looked at the Roundup Ready corn and compared it to its same corn that hadn't been genetically engineered, and they found over 200 changes in the proteins and metabolites. And a lot of them, they don't know what the effects will be, but they do know what the effects are on two my favorite terms in this particular study. It was putrescine and cadaverine. They were higher. And they are, yes, they're responsible for the foul odor of rotting dead bodies. They do give bad breath and promote histamine, so increase allergic reactions. And when they combine with another part of the diet, can promote cancer. So again, there's a synergy. There's also another synergy, and I'm going to use this as a way to get into the next part. There's another synergy as well. The EPA is corrupt as far as science. They've ignored, they've ignored science. And that makes it easy. And so they only require data from Monsanto on glyphosate. They don't do their own testing. On just glyphosate, the so-called active ingredient, knowing that there are other ingredients in Roundup that are 10,000 times more toxic, and that Roundup as a whole can be 125 times more toxic than glyphosate. And yet they never, and no one sprays glyphosate. They always spray Roundup or a glyphosate-based herbicide. But they only require test results on glyphosate, and not even the glyphosate that's used in Roundup, which is glyphosate salts, but they use it on technical glyphosate, which is safer. And then they don't look at the low dose effects because they figure the dose makes the poison. And if you get below this level, it's not going to have any problem. That's ancient science. Endocrine disruptions, there's these U curves, where at very tiny levels you have a big change in the hormonal system. And then when you add the chemical, the change goes lower. And then it bottoms out, and now you add the chemical, and then it goes up again. Because this is a toxic effect, and that's an endocrine effect, so to speak. And the EPA never looks at this side. So they ignore everything. They ignore the synergistic effects, they ignore the low-dose effects. So you can ignore the EPA. All right. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to transition to a second half of my talk, which is new territory for me. The two questions that I've gotten most over the last 22 years, speaking in 45 countries, is one, how do you avoid GMOs? And two, in addition to avoiding GMOs, what else can I do? And I always say to the second question, it's above my pay grade. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical doctor. I can handle the first question very well, but I can't handle the second question. But I did bring the information about the health dangers on GMOs to the medical community. No one else was talking about it, and I did introduce it, and they started to actually get rid of it in their patients, thousands of doctors, and some of them started to apply protocols and develop protocols. And it's amazing what they came up with, and I went, oh my God, I need to share this. So I started to investigate these different scientists and product formulators and doctors, and said, I need to share this information, and I'm still not qualified to answer the question, but I'm overqualified to ask the questions. So I did a series called Healing from GMOs and Roundup. Over the summer, we had about 50,000 participants, and we got incredibly rave reviews. People said, it's the best, I'm a summit junkie, and it's the best summit I have ever seen. We had people say, I saw everything twice, I took notes, and I still bought the product because I love it and I want to share it. It was like, it was so much energy with the last minute. Okay, we're going to do a global community gathering. Hundreds of people came. They wanted to know more. It was like an incredible, we had the best people. So what I'm going to do is just share some snippets of these people, of some of their gems. And we've stopped selling it online. You can't get it. And when it starts to sell again, it'll sell for double what it sold during the thing. I do have, however, an opportunity for you to buy it tonight. You can fill out an order form, and I'll send it to you at like half the price of what it's going to be. But you can't get it online, and we're not making it available yet. We're waiting because we want to do it so that there's a certain period of time when people watch it, so they actually watch it. Because if it's available, like, oh yeah, it's free online, oh yeah, I'll get to it, and people don't get to it. But when they actually get to it, it is amazing. It changes their lives. So it turns out I wrote 2 books, but I actually wrote a third because this is the transcript of the 18 interviews. And it's like 450 pages. So I accidentally wrote another book. And there's like the DVDs, 9 DVDs. So so that'll be available if you want to get it afterwards. And I want to just do my best to remember the gems. Because a lot of it was new information to me. And I've been doing this a long time. These are the people. Our cast of characters includes, we'll go through one at a time and I'll see what kind of fun things I could share. I actually changed my format. Paul told me I had 20 minutes less than I thought, and so I had actually embedded each one of their comments at the right time in this whole lecture. I just said, nah, I'm just going to talk and then see what I can remember here. All right, so Michelle Perro, she was in the film, Secret Ingredient. She was in the film Genetic Roulette. And her gift to all of us is that she realized early on that it was GMOs and Roundup that was causing this dramatic change in children. She's a pediatrician, named one of the top pediatricians in the country for like 5 years. And she was seeing the same treatments were no longer working. And she was seeing epidemics of things that had never before been in the children in the United States. And she started reading one of my books and saw a picture of the guts of rats that were altered from Dr. Pustai's potatoes and said, oh my God, this is what's happening to our children. And she started studying up on it. We met, and she started putting people on non-GMO and organic diets. And sometimes it'd be an autistic child, and she put the whole family on an organic diet, and the father's kidney situation would clear up, and the other daughter's ADHD would clear up, and the mother's other problems would clear up. And she was seeing it. So she is like the front line detective, because she's been doing this close to 40 years. She saw the change, and she's learned how to reverse. And you can go, by the way, to Facebook, to the Institute for Responsible Technology's Facebook. I interviewed her just last month at the Heirloom Festival. I said, quickly, some people are saying, how do you deal with all these detoxification protocols? What do you do? And she just rapid-fired the stages that she brings someone through if they're in a sensitive situation. Some people can take everything at once, but her stages were brilliant. It's very important for those that have serious issues and they want to detoxify. Listen to that. So Mike McNeil, an agronomist, he sees the problems with the soil, with the crops, with the livestock, and with the humans. I'll tell one story. So one of the things that glyphosate does is that it kills beneficial bacteria both in the soil and in the gut. And the beneficial bacteria in both help reduce the population of the pathogens. So the pathogens take off in the soil and they can take off in the gut. And there's one pathogen called Clostridium botulinum, which produces botulism toxin. And there's acute botulism and there's chronic botulism. And there's botulism in every stomach of every cow, but it's very small because there's another beneficial bacteria that keeps it small, but that beneficial bacteria is sensitive to glyphosate. And glyphosate is sprayed on most of the livestock feed in the United States and in Europe because it's Roundup ready. And so the animals eat it, and what can happen is that bacteria can be killed, the botulism can take off. And there is an epidemic of chronic botulism in dairy cows in Europe and probably in the United States too. They don't talk about it. So he had given a lecture somewhere and had some time before he flew home the next day, and a proud dairy person wanted to show him his dairy. So he brought him over in the morning, and he showed, and Mike is saying, very nice, very nice, very nice. Very nice. And he sees something like that, and he sees something else, and he goes, okay, very nice. And then he tells him how great his cows look and whatnot. And he goes, there's that one cow over there. It's not eating. I'm going to make a prediction. That within a few days of not eating, it'll all of a sudden eat a lot. And then you'll come back in the morning, and it'll be dead, and it'll have foam in its mouth. And the guy was like, oh my God, I had other cows do the same. And he mentioned the number of cows. He says, yeah, you got 2 or 3 of those currently. And he described the botulism. And he said, but I don't feed Roundup Ready. He says, yeah, but you had dried distillers grain over there, and if you looked at it, it didn't say organic, so there's going to be some glyphosate in there. And Mike said, and don't drink the milk. And the guy turned white. And he said, what's this? My grandson or my grandchild is 2 months old. He's in the hospital, and we don't know what's wrong. And he's been drinking the milk. And Mike said, go to the hospital right now and have the child tested for botulism. They won't do it normally. Have him tested. Stop listening to me. Go! And they saved his life. Mike and I were kind of in tears during that story in this series. So Barbara Royal is Oprah Winfrey's veterinarian, and she also sees all of these dogs and cats. And I asked her at one time, once she learned about GMOs and Roundup, she puts every single patient on a new diet before she does anything else. They have all sorts of complicated problems, and she goes, okay, we're going to start you on a new diet, come back in some weeks. She said 50 to 70% of the problems are either gone or managed by then. 50 to 70%. Now, we also know, she said in this 10-minute film that we have, she's one of the speakers, that she hardly ever saw cancers in dogs. Now she sees them every day. Well, dogs are the highest amount of cancer of any mammal. I was being interviewed by Ty Bollinger for The Truth About Pet Cancer. He said 1 out of every 1.6 dogs have cancer. And I discovered, through another one of the speakers, that the urine in dogs has 40 to 50 times the amount of glyphosate compared to humans. And we're going to be releasing very, very soon, next week or the week after, the list of the pet foods that we've tested and others have tested and the amount of glyphosate. And also which pet foods are safer. So if you have pets, she's a person to listen to. Tom O'Brien, he's a gluten guru. So if you're gluten sensitive, he's probably taught the people that taught you. And he developed a product that breaks down gluten, 99% of it in the first hour while it's still in the stomach, and also the other 7 allergens, the top allergens. And that's faster than anything that's been recorded. And I was interviewing him, or he was interviewing me. We were being videotaped at one point. I don't remember what it was for, but I said to him, does it break down Bt toxin? Because that's hard to break down. That's the insecticide that kills the insects. And he said, I don't know, let's test it. So we shelved the interview. It was an hour-long recorded interview. We had a film crew. We shelved it. We waited to wait till the test results came back. So we announced, as the test results, over 60% of the Bt toxin gets dissolved in their sample laboratory system in 90 minutes before usually it leaves the stomach. So each of these people are actually recommending, I encourage them to recommend products that they formulated or that they use. So Barbara Royal formulated certain products and she recommends certain diets. So it's all practical stuff so that people can get active with stuff. Sayerji, Green Med Info, brilliant guy. He and I just spent almost the whole time talking about the genetically engineered apple and potato, which uses double-stranded RNA, which could theoretically reprogram our DNA if we eat it. So if you eat the Arctic apple, which is if you go to Amazon and you get the pre-sliced apple, doesn't say it's genetically engineered, don't get it. It won't turn brown. It's genetically engineered to lie about its age. The Botox apple. So don't eat it because the double-stranded RNA, what it does is it's designed to silence the browning mechanism, but it could silence theoretically genes inside our bodies. Very, very dangerous. And so he and I talk about that. Hyla Cass is like the original psychiatrist who stopped prescribing drugs. And she's an integrative medicine practitioner. She's written 10 books. And it's amazing what she talks about is how certain nutrient deficiencies, and glyphosate creates nutrient deficiencies, can dictate a certain type of depression if you're serotonin deficient, another type of depression if you're dopamine deficient, cravings, a lot of older women craving ice cream at night. It's to design the tryptophan to get through the blood-brain barrier so that it acts as serotonin in the brain. She's just take L-tryptophan. So she was talking about how so much of our, and even a particular disorder where people are socially awkward, comes from a particular deficiency. And it's like, oh my God, we don't have to feel guilty. We just need to stop eating non-organic food and maybe supplement ourselves with stuff that's been robbed. And she has specific supplements that she recommended for the brain. Zach Bush, how many people have heard him speak? How many people have had their lives changed or been incredibly impressed by hearing him speak? Two hands up. And it's like there's like Zach Bush groupies all over the world now. Well, we did a bonus interview with him and a bonus interview with Tom, in addition to the ones that we made available online. And it's amazing. He actually shows in his videos where you add glyphosate or gluten to human cells, they separate. And he found 50 million year old soil that creates these carbon snowflakes from ancient microorganisms that create intercellular communication. You put that on the human cells and it reforms the gap. Or it doesn't break in the first place if you put that in the human cells first. And he said, what happens is all these intercellular communications, that's the basis of health. The basis of disease is lack of intercellular communication. For example, human kidney cells, you put them in a petri dish, they're very sensitive, they often die no matter what you do. But you can grow them individually as cells. For the first time in science history, he put his stuff on, they formed a membrane. They began speaking together. His work is groundbreaking. And he even talks about, and I'm just going to talk, I could talk about this guy for hours, that as he gives this, restores the name of the substance, to people over 16, 18 months, their thinking, their social relationships, their healthy boundaries start to change. Because as their intercellular communication and healthy boundaries happen inside, it gets reflected in their personalities and in their decisions. So he's a real visionary. Lee Cowden doesn't see people anymore. He just creates protocols for doctors. I think Mercola still has him as his doctor, but other than that, he just creates protocols. And he said he's been testing people every year in terms of their minerals. And every year, people need more minerals. Because what does glyphosate do? It binds with minerals and makes it unavailable. So the minerals are not getting into the plants. And then the animals eat the mineral-deficient plants. It doesn't get into the animals. But the animals also eat the glyphosate, which binds with their minerals, making them unavailable. We eat the plants, we eat the mineral-deficient plants, the mineral-deficient animals, and we eat the glyphosate, which grabs our minerals, so we become mineral-deficient. So he says more and more minerals, and he has a whole detox program with saunas, and how to use sauna and lymph drainage and stuff. So he's been successfully implementing that. And so there is not just changing your diet, but there are ways to do deeper dive. This is David Sandoval and Andre Naj. They formulated something called Biomedic, and it's through Purium. He's the founder of Purium, or co-founder. And they did it specifically for glyphosate. And they found that in a very, very small trial, there was a 74% reduction of glyphosate in the urine with no change in the diet, and a 75% reduction in an inflammatory marker called C-reactive protein. And he explains why and the different components of it. So that I found interesting. I'm looking forward to the next. So Mercola, he talked about a number of things. He was just doing a book on detox, so he got really geeky in terms of the pathways in detoxification. So if you're into the geek thing, that's it. But he talked about the mitochondria. Now, someone else mentioned that this I found fascinating. You take a tissue of a 90-year-old and a tissue of a youth, and you look at it, and the only thing they found different was the mitochondria health. That maybe, he said, about 95% of the mitochondria were damaged or missing, and that was like the main thing. And Mercola talked about the mitochondria theory of aging. There's a mitochondria theory of cancer. Mitochondria is the source of the energy in the body, and Otto Warburg got a Nobel Prize, and he believed that cancer was a mitochondrial disease. And 10% of the body weight is mitochondria. I mean, there's some cells in the heart that have 5,000 mitochondria. It's the energy center, so the heart needs that all the time. And so what's a mitochondrial toxin? Glyphosate. And why would we have more brain fog and more fatigue if we're eating that stuff? Mitochondria. The brain, if you saw the film, 25% of the brain, of the energy of the body is in the brain. Mitochondria. If it gets damaged, now we have the basis of a lot of cognitive disorders. So he talks about a particular diet, sort of a ketogenic, normal, going back and forth, so you get kind of a flex situation. And one of the things it does is it helps the mitochondria. So if you see anything that you like, you can go and Google them and follow them and go on their YouTubes and whatnot. So Carrie, I met her first when she was a Reuters reporter, and she now works for a nonprofit and wrote a book called Whitewashed about the damage, about Monsanto's covering up of the evidence. So I'm really into that. I've been exposing that stuff for years, so we have a delightful sharing stories of how bad they were and how they tried to respond to the World Health Organization's declaration that glyphosate is a Class 2A carcinogen, and how they tried to orchestrate outcry and had their front groups and ghost wrote. It's really catching them red-handed. So it's the kind of stories I love to tell because they're fun, and you have a villain, and we got them. So Kiran Krishnan develops products. He's been a product formulator, and he's an expert at the microbiome. And he actually tests stuff, doesn't just think it works. He tests things in combination. And he's identified some superhero strains. And so we go deeply into particular strains and what they do, and it's fascinating. And the microbiome is ridiculously interesting. And this guy brought out some of that. He's Dietrich Klinghardt. I introduced him in the interviews as a demigod among integrative physicians. And I'll give you some stories from Dietrich, because he I find, he's very low-key. He's German, he's kind of quiet, and he speaks. And you're going, did you just say that? Did you just say that? He said, for example, St. John's wort. There's all these studies that show that it's very effective for stress, and all these studies that show that it's not. When he looked in the studies, or others did, they found that those where it was more of the whole plant worked. He said, it could be the microbiome that's attracted and grown on the herb that does most of the work. And he said, salad, we don't have the ability to break down salad and extract its nutrients, maybe 5%, but it's filled with microbiome. So maybe it's the microbiome. He said the brain has a microbiome. When you kill the brain's microbiome, we get stupider. He said, and we're the only species. There's only one other species. Well, he said another one is that there's brain cells, and they give off millions of biophotons per second. Or if you look at a rat without that, it's 1 biophoton per minute. He said it's possible that these microbiomes, these bacteria and other organisms, are actually giving us our higher consciousness. And he talks about it as not just in us, but globally in the soil and whatnot. And I was saying, so this is like the micro Jedi army that's dedicated to our fulfillment and success. And it's so amazing. In breast cancer, there's a change in the bacteria in the breast. It's replaced by a certain bacteria. When they kill that bacteria, the tumor expands. It's bacteria that comes to help. Zach Bush talks about in the second interview the Alzheimer's patients, that there's a certain fungus that comes to their brain, and that some doctors think it's an infection. But he says, no, it's actually to help the body. He talks about candida has the advantage of helping the body. Even Lyme disease, it has the spirochetes have a particular beneficial thing and he describes it. So the whole body itself has 98% of the DNA in the body is the microbiome. And there's a crosstalk that happens, partly because of the DNA, but also the RNA. And there's like this whole interspecies thing, and we have, in just a number of cells, we're 10 times the number of cells in the microbiome compared to human cells. So it was ridiculously enlightening to hear person after person talk about the microbiome in deeper and deeper ways. And what do we have? We have antibacterial soap. We have glyphosate sprayed so much in the United States that it's in the air, it's in the rain, it's in the surface water. Yeah. So it's an amazing thing when we think about shifting not just humans, but the entire ecosystem with a broad-spectrum antibiotic with 300 million pounds alone just in the United States. And one other thing that Dietrich said is he has a whole glyphosate protocol. And he said something I've never heard anyone else say. He said he tests his patients' urine for glyphosate, and his really sick patients, like the autistic kids, have no glyphosate in the urine until he starts the detox. Then it starts to trickle out more and more, then they get better. And he was the guy that alerted the whole world to mercury. He was like the father of this is dangerous. Then he did that with Lyme disease. I saw him at an environmental health symposium, and he said, now we should be focusing on glyphosate. It's the number one thing to look at. In fact, when he told me he had a glyphosate protocol, I said, no, I got to do this series. People have to know this, and there were several people that have one. Now, a lot of people can't afford the probiotics, but they can afford food, generally. And Karen teaches people how to transform food into probiotic sources through fermentation. And she did a crowdsourcing thing to raise money, a Kickstarter campaign, crowdsourcing for a product she called Crowdsource, which I thought was brilliant. And it's this great stainless steel thing you put on top of a mason jar. And she's also a chef. She's a nutritionist and a chef. And so she creates recipes that have spices and different foods so that they're delicious. And if you ask anyone about the microbiome, it's all in the diversity. There's certain superhero strains, if you ask Kieran, like we talked about, but the diversity is critical. One of the speakers said they found a preserved body from 5,000 years ago, and it had 20,000 varieties in the microbiome, and we have an average of 500. And so the diversity comes from the different foods being fermented, and you get the probiotics, but you also get the prebiotics, which is what the probiotics eat for their food. So anyway, Karen talks about the fermenting world. And Julie is a nutritionist. So with Mercola, it's like, get this particular supplement and get that particular supplement and this particular supplement. With Julie, it's like asparagus, or this type of food. She's like a love affair with food. And she said, okay, the liver has a 2-phase detoxification. So she's really into the science. And this is what helps. These are the foods that help phase 1. These are the foods that help phase 2. So it turns out we have a medicine cabinet in the produce section. And she explains how to deal with that. So, and then she has a detox protocol and recipes and stuff. Now, Seralini. How many people have heard of Seralini? Seralini is the #1 researcher of GMOs and Roundup in the world in terms of their dangers. And he discovered massive damage to rats, both eating the Roundup-ready corn that had been sprayed with Roundup, the Roundup-ready corn that had never been sprayed with Roundup, the Roundup that didn't have any corn, whether it was the Roundup or the corn alone or in combination. It caused multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage to these rats. He discovered a lot of problems, and we won't go into that. But he also studied detoxification. And he found that 3 particular herbs, when you put them in combination, they detox human cells, they detox rats. And he said when you put these 3 on the cells, they'll detox. If you put like 6 or more of these aromatic herbs, they won't detox because the cell is trying to get rid of the aromatic herbs. And so you take a certain amount, you put these aromatic herbs on a warm plate. And he said this is what the ancients, the indigenous people taught us. So this very hardcore toxicologist is now working with a chef to talk about it. And he also talked about the chef, you can actually taste glyphosate in wine. So they put drops of glyphosate in the natural occurring amount, not natural occurring, in the store-bought occurring amount, and they used pure wine, and people could taste the difference, which was shocking. So it also operates at very, very low levels. And Josh Axe, he talked about not just general stuff, but also how we all have different body types. And there's Ayurvedic body types, and there's Chinese body types. And he went through them, and it was fascinating. Like, yeah, if you have this particular body type, then you have this organ's going to be a problem. You'll have this particular emotion going haywire, and this is the kind of ways that you need to fix it. So it was interesting how the same chemical problem, or glyphosate or GMO problem, can manifest differently depending on their body types, and the repair mechanism may be different as well. And then finally, Larry Bolin tests for glyphosate. He showed a chart of the levels of glyphosate in oats and wheat and legumes. He said those are the three, OWL, O-W-L. Those are the ones he never eats unless they're organic. And then there was a bunch of others. So he shows some of the research, how much glyphosate is in the food, and he's the one that tested the urine as well. So this is the product if you're interested. It's $97 for the digital version only. If you fill out we're going to be meeting in the book signing area. You'll get the entire digital thing. You'll get 23 expert interviews, 4 additional sessions, lots of products that they recommend, listed, and you'll get an additional digital version. So we want to spread this to other people. And if you want to get the DVD and the hard copy as well, then it's $127 plus $20 for the shipping. So that's available, and I'll be outside for anyone that wants it. But I just did this in the summer, and this is the first time I gave this type of lecture. So as I was giving it, I was thinking, how valuable is this? Because we're not going into one person's deep detoxification protocol. We're just touching in it and saying that it exists. So I'm not sure how you take this in. I have no idea. So I wanted to hear from you before you ask me questions, and before we ask more questions about this at all. I want to know if this last part was of interest to you, or what was of interest to you and what was helpful. Because, again, I didn't teach you how to detox. It's above my pay grade. I just introduced you to a bunch of people that do know how to do that. So raise your hand if you found it valuable. Raise your hand if you found it okay. All right. And anyone want to comment? Because, again, this is the first time I've done it this way. I usually integrated it, I did it twice. Yeah.
As long as there's information that allows us to dig deeper into all of those, all the presenters and their products and so forth, then it's unbelievably valuable.
All right. Thank you.
I think it's fantastic. You're covering all these different realms of science and how to get better. Top drawer. Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that would be great if it was like a conference that actually had then the speakers that you then could say, okay, they'll have more of that protocol. Because it's overwhelming to think about the amount of time that would go in. I mean, I know a lot of those people that you presented that, like the microbiome alone.
And it's interesting. I mean, the summit was a conference, but there's 27 videos. But what I do in one of the talks that is available to you if you get the digital version is I review each one with a little more depth. So I said, because we did this, we had a replay weekend, and I said, you're not all going to have a chance to watch it all. So let me just tell you what people are saying. And some of it was what I said just now. And so if you can go to the ones that you really like. Because some people are already fermenting vegetables, or they're never going to ferment vegetables, and they don't really care about that. And some people are like, they don't have the money for supplements, so they want to hear Julie and about which foods. And then there's the more esoteric ones would be Dietrich Klinghardt and Zach Bush. And then also Kieran Krishnan is pretty amazing. So I actually understand, but I wouldn't want to shorten them. If you have a conference and it's over 2 days, everyone's giving a shorter amount. In this, you get to sort of sit with, and you also get an audio version. So I insisted on that so that you can actually just download it into your phone. And then whenever you're traveling, plug it into your headphones or your car. Yeah, over here.
So, with all this information you got, how do you eat now? Or what do you take from that?
It's a great question. For years people would say, what do you eat? And I say, I'll tell you what I don't eat. I don't use myself as a model because everyone's body is different. There's people who are hypersensitive. There are people who are very strong. And There are people who are strict vegetarians. They're paleo, Western price, raw, vegan, all of them, just all of them. And I'll go to a conference, and one time I was at a conference and I was with Sally Fallon. I was moderating. Sally Fallon was on the conference, and then there was, I forget her name, but she's another Western price person who's a doctor. And then there was a guy who was a raw vegan chef. And then there was another doctor who was into raw food. And there was someone else. And I said to the audience, you came here to figure out what to eat, right? Forget it. You're just going to be confused. But they all agree with me. And they all agree no GMOs, no glyphosate. And so my strategic positioning is to set the bar as low as possible. So I say, if you want to, right now the bar is go organic. And if you want to eat, organic processed foods, it's far better than regular processed foods. Of course, non-processed foods is better, nutrient dense is better, et cetera, et cetera. But so I don't hold myself as an example. And there's also kind of a conscience liability. Because some people may be very sensitive and get hurt with low levels. Like a friend, I'll just tell you one thing. I don't eat genetic, I eat corn chips. I eat corn chips that are organic, right? Steve Drucker, a friend of mine, wrote a book, brilliant book on GMOs. He doesn't eat anything with corn because he's not willing to take the chance of the contamination. Now, I put out the word, eat organic. That's our institute's position, Institute for Responsible Technology. Eat organic. But some organic is contaminated with glyphosate and GMOs. And I don't bother with that level of concern, but I also talk to a person who's in charge of a group of highly sensitive corn allergic people. And their diet has to be completely different. So if I say, this is what I eat, and someone copies me, that could be very painful. It could be hurtful for them. So I won't answer your question. There we go. Yes?
I've met people with corn allergies. Is it really that they're allergic to the corn, or is it the Roundup?
So when I remember back years ago at the beginning of this lecture, I was talking to that woman who said that everyone gets better at her office, and I went to her office. She said that what happens is she'll take people off of all grains, not just the GMO variety, because their sensitivity is now to all grains. And that after some time, she may introduce back corn or soy into the diet, non-GMO of course, and they can take it. But initially they can't because their body is reactive to the whole grain because of the impact. People talk about wheat. Is it the wheat that's creating gluten sensitivity? I think I was the first person to raise the suggestion that it was GMOs and Roundup that were contributing to the gluten sensitivity epidemic. And there's other things, the way it's been hybridized, the way it's cooked and whatnot. But I talked about it with Tom O'Brien. It was the first call I met him with. I said, I called up Hyla Cass, who's a friend of mine, and she knows everyone in the industry. And I said, who's the best gluten? Oh, Tom O'Brien, he's the gluten guru. So I called up and said, I'm going to give a press conference with Mark Hyman in the city, and I need to know, I want to pose this idea that GMOs and Roundup are causing gluten sensitivity and describe what they did, and he agreed that they do presuppose the body. In my interview with Zach Bush, it turns out he said, I've discovered the causal mechanism that when you apply glyphosate to the human intestine, it increases the receptor cells to the gluten protein. And that demonstrates an increased gluten sensitivity mechanism in the physiology. So when it comes down to whether it's the corn or whatnot, or in the case of wheat is sprayed with glyphosate. So if you eat wheat, you're getting a dose of glyphosate unless it's organic or happens to be not sprayed from your source. So it's hard to know. A couple of those studies or those correlation charts were relating to the amount of glyphosate sprayed on wheat, not on soy and corn.
One other question. The Roundup started, around the 70s?
Roundup in the 70s, GMOs at 96.
Okay, so let's say back in the 50s, what kind of percentage of people had allergies to wheat or corn?
Yeah, much less. Much less. And the thing is, that's an important question. It doesn't prove anything, but it's an important question, and you're right. The allergies in general skyrocketed. Asthma in general skyrocketed. So, yeah.
The other chemical that they spray on our food besides Roundup is atrazine. In this detox program, did they mention anything about that?
Good question. So a lot of detox programs are generic, where you open the circulation through two of the doctors mentioned the sauna and certain exercises and certain supplements you take. The detox protocol through the liver, the 2 phases of the liver, well, detoxing anything. So we did not talk about it because it's not part of the conference. But absolutely, detoxification is often something that takes care of a lot of different chemicals. So there's 80,000 chemicals that have been released. So yeah. You first, then you.
I saw on your slide hepatitis B.
C.
Oh, C. Okay, that's
Infection.
yes. So
How would you? Yes, that was a good question. So, and also deaths to intestinal infection. Again, another infection. So, the system can become more prone to infection if it's weakened, and the liver itself is one of the organs that seems to be damaged the most readily. There's a lot of evidence showing liver damage, and if you have a damaged liver, if you have a damaged terrain, then it can provide the terrain or the basis for the infection. There's that whole Pasteur, other guy, that's the one, Claude Bernard, and that if the terrain is healthy, you won't get the infection. So I took out a slide in my normal thing where I could show pictures of the rat livers after they fed GM soy versus non-GM soy, and it's gnarly. So that would be my answer. There may be more technical answers.
Why are all this?
Yes,
Listen, why are all these plants?
I forgot to say that.
What's the reason?
I forgot. Good catch. Desiccant, which means to dry down. So they spray it just before harvest. In the Monsanto handbook, they say spray the wheat 3 to 5 days before harvest. Well, it dries it down. It forces. What happens is the dying plant will send all of its energy to the offspring to grow quickly. So it creates a rapid ripening, and so it happens particularly used in short growing seasons, like in Canada and northern United States. So they'll do it to speed it up. It also kills all of the weeds for next year. It also dries it down for the mold so that if it's stacked and whatnot, it won't end up getting moldy. So it's a bunch of things all at once. And so it kills it. It kills it over some days, but it ends up in the food. The glyphosate goes to the cells that are most active, which is going to be in that food portion. And in oats, they're open to the spray, so it goes right into the oats. They're not kind of hidden like the wheat. So,
My comment, I have comments.
oh, that's right, yeah.
The comment was about the evidence that was put in the work.
Oh, I did, yeah, deeply.
What did it say?
How do you turn this thing off? So maybe someone could figure that out. So, yeah, I was there during the closing arguments. I read the opening arguments. I interviewed the attorney afterwards for 4 hours. I'll be posting the whole thing in about 10-part series on our website at responsibletechnology.org. I have to say that the bad news is that the judge may vacate $250 million of that settlement, of the charge. She may vacate the punitive damage portion, and so both sides submitted their arguments to her in writing on Friday, and those are publicly available documents. I haven't read them yet. So our fingers are crossed. So the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is what this guy had. And when you look at the animal studies, there were 5 or 6 that showed a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was the strongest correlation of any cancer for glyphosate. They also found that there was some epidemiological evidence showing higher levels of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then the causation. Cancer can be created by oxidative stress and DNA mutations. So that's what it clearly does do. And some of the things that they did is they found They got millions of documents available called the Monsanto Papers, which I've been reading some. It's just fantastic. And Carrie Gillum talks about it in the interview. It's just fantastic to catch him red-handed. So there was a Dr. Parry who was an expert at the causation of cancer, at oxidative stress and mutagenesis. And Monsanto hired Dr. Parry because there was all this research saying that glyphosate causes these things. And that got them nervous. So they wanted to hire a doctor or scientist to prove it wrong. So they brought the best person in the world and just gave him 4 studies. Said, what do you think of these 4? Hoping that he would figure out a way to turn it around. And he found out, oh yeah, it looks like it probably does. And they freaked out and they said, okay, look at all this research. And says, oh, now we know it definitely does. And then you read some of the emails going back and forth. One says, has this guy ever done research for corporations before? They actually asked that question, like, how could he be... And they said, we could spend a lot of money to try and bring him around, but we need to find someone else to do that. So they're legally required to report that kind of stuff to the EPA, and they didn't. So they illegally buried that information. And what they did then is they ghost wrote a study which claimed exactly the opposite and got it published. So Monsanto was involved in writing it, but they paid other people to put their names on it. And then that was the most quoted study by the groups that said it doesn't cause cancer. So you would have to say that the most official determination of whether glyphosate causes cancer is by the official organization that makes that determination about everything, which is the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And they meet and discuss a number of things over a 2-week period. They study all of the things, and they came out with a monograph, a long article about 90 or 100 pages on glyphosate, and said it's probably a human carcinogen. They can't say it's definite because they didn't have enough studies, because there's something ethical about giving people glyphosate to see if they get cancer. But there was enough studies on animals, so they said it does cause cancer in animals, and it does cause oxidative stress and damage to the human DNA. And it's higher levels where it is sprayed. So all the other criteria were there, but they just didn't have the official criteria to say it was definitely carcinogenic. And then Monsanto freaked out and created this entire campaign against their finding and even against the committee, and tried to get Congress to defund the committee. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So I'm close to finishing, and I want to see if anyone has like a pressing question and like they're not going to feel complete unless they get an answer. And that's okay. We got 1, we got 2, we got 3. Okay, let's do those 3. Oh, you get to ask as many as you want. You're the boss. For general public, Roundup is fine. Okay. The word glyphosate is becoming more popular because of the trial. It's interesting. It reminded me of something. So years ago, when the IARC committee determined that it was a Class 2A carcinogen, I was traveling and I got a call, can you be on the doctor's TV show tonight by Skype? And there's going to be a Monsanto toxicologist. And I've been waiting for years to do it. It's like, I think I can make it myself available. So it's a national TV show, 3 million people. So she was in the studio audience, I was on Skype. And she was trained, they trained her in the media and all this, and so she was saying her points that you knew she had learned how to smile and all that. And so she said at the very end, I'm very confident in this chemical, both as a mother, and I can back it up as a scientist. So that was one of her talking points. She's a mother, and she's comfortable. She allows her kids to eat it, and that's why everyone in the world should allow their kids to eat it. So, and I was like doing this and this. And there's a whole story about how they called me to fact check. Can you go fact check this and with this? They're really nervous because of all the things that I said. And they left in most of it, but they didn't keep in all of it. They didn't keep in the fact that it was Monsanto's former attorney that was in charge of the GMO policy at the FDA, and then became Monsanto's vice president, and then became the U.S. food czar, at the FDA again. But so that was 2015. And then IARC came out with its determination that it was, oh no, that was when IARC came out with it. But then the lawsuit happened. And then when the lawsuit happened, Monsanto made public millions of documents. And I got to look at the documents. I said, find Donna Farmer. That was her name. And among the documents in there, she showed up. And here she said, to another colleague, we can't say that Roundup or the full formulation doesn't cause cancer because the studies haven't been done. There's Donna Farmer saying, ghostwriting an article, but taking her name off of it, taking Monsanto's name off of it, and eliminating the link to miscarriages. There's Donna Farmer, where it says, and Donna and I believe that the deaths in the study may be treatment related. There's Donna Farmer in a thread talking about how the whole formulation, not the glyphosate, but the whole formulation, might have created the tumors in the study where they exposed it to the skin. So over and over again, you see in private, she wasn't so positive and wasn't so confident. So I called up the producer at the doctor's, and I said, it appears that your guest lied. Can I send you the information? Can I introduce you to the lawyer? Can I introduce you to his plaintiffs? And so she said, oh, it sounds like we might want to do something. And I said, how long would you think? She said, oh, maybe 4 minutes. They did a 1-hour full episode show just with me and the attorney and the plaintiff. And they brought in an epidemiologist by Skype. It was an entire hour on the Monsanto papers, and Monsanto did not send Donna Farmer. They refused. So what's interesting is, it was good. What was interesting is that in this last trial was in San Francisco, and Monsanto did not put any of its employees on the stand, and of course they could ignore a subpoena from the state. But there's a big trial coming up in St. Louis, so they can subpoena them, which will be fantastic. So there was one had to ask over here.
Oh, no, mine's more of just a quick comment and observation and request to you.
Yeah, but I may make a long story out of it.
So, we eat all organic, non-GMO at home. I still have IBS, and I'm wondering the percentage of time that you can't eat at home, like eating at restaurants or something, you know? I mean, realistically, you don't want to shut yourself at home. So that part is hard to figure out, how much you can still go out and, you know, intake this stuff.
So
On restaurants, and then when my son goes off to college, I am very worried because the colleges are going to be serving, you know, conventional meat.
right.
I'm worried about all these kids going off eating all this horrible stuff suddenly and how their health is going to plummet. And I'd like to start a movement, you know, to get colleges to go give cleaner food options.
Right. So let's talk about the IBS first, and then the restaurants and the school. It could be a lot of things, of course, but one of the reasons why Tom O'Brien developed that supplement to break up, to consume the gluten, was for people to try to take it with them to restaurants. And he said, I'm not encouraging you to eat gluten and take the pill. Still avoid it, but you may have exposure to it in small concentrations, and so take the pill just in case. So that's kind of allowing people who are very sensitive to wheat to go to restaurants. But it's obvious. I mean, like, same thing with the autism. I know some twins that are autistic. They never had vaccines, and they've been an organic vegetarian all their lives. And, you know, the parents were too. So there's obviously specifics. As far as going to your son, I think that your son should watch the film, Secret Ingredients, and also Genetic Roulette. We've had some high schoolers who've completely changed their diet. We've had 13-year-olds who've changed their diet. At the end of Genetic Roulette, there's a 5-year-old who, when he was 4, he changed the food served in his nursery school. For some reason, his father read to him at night my book, Genetic Roulette. No, but here's the point. And that's exactly why I said, show him the film. Because it's like, he will discount you because you're mom. And so people say, how do I tell my son? I said, you don't. Let me do it. Show them the film. And so, one way to get some people, may not be your son, one people get some people, can you take a look at this, like a farmer who's like pro-GMO? You've talked about how good GMOs were, and I'm confused now because I have this thing. Could you look at it and help me understand it? Oh, sure. And they'll look at it because they're the advisor. However it is that I had one grandmother tell me that she told her kids, if there's anything you do in your life because I ask you to, please watch this film. And they watched Genetic Roulette. They changed the grandson's diet. He no longer acted out at school. He could breathe again easier. And she said to me that they didn't get the calls every day from school like they used to, except the day after he ate at the other grandparent's house, because it was that quick. All right, over here.
I think with vaccines, I don't know if it was the CDC or American Medical Association, that they said it costs the government too much money to test new products that come out, that we're going to leave the testing up to those companies. Is it the same way with the Food and Drug Administration?
Yeah. FDA, EPA, they don't actually do their own testing. The drug companies do the tests. Monsanto does the test, etc.
It's a conflict of interest, though.
Yeah, of course. And also, all right. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to do a closing statement because that's what I always do, and I never know what I'm going to say until I start. You guys are kind of in the elite situation. You're already self-selecting because you're here. You already are here because you have been aware of many of these things. And now you know more about GMOs and Roundup than almost anyone, because most people don't know this, what you just saw. So I would like to encourage you to make a change, not only in your own life, but share it with others. The easiest thing is to show the film, because that's like an instant conversion. And if that's an opportunity for you, then that would be great. But I want to say that it's a huge thing. If you look at those charts, it's an enormous number of people that may be affected by this. Essentially, the entire population, to some degree, may be poisoned if they're not switching to an organic diet. But it's also all future generations. There's a new technique, or new set of techniques out called gene editing, which is very inexpensive and very easy to do. And so just like a gold rush, there's a gene rush. And they're trying to go after anything with DNA and alter it and patent it and put it out there while the patent is still active. And so we're facing an opportunity or a threat where we may be replacing the products of the billions of years of evolution with designer organisms that reproduce and change forever our gene pool. Monsanto's stated goal was to genetically engineer 100% of all commercial seeds in the world and patent them. And now they have genetically engineered salmon being sold and eaten in Canada, and 35 more fish in the pipeline. They have genetically engineered insects released in 4 countries, and they want to do it in the United States. They have genetically engineered trees, algae, fungus, bacteria. Basically, they want to replace nature. So this generation we've had something foisted on us that is ridiculously important, but is also an opportunity that no one else in history of mankind has had. Because we have the capacity to protect all living beings and all future generations. No one in the history of the world has had that opportunity, because there was no threat that can damage the entire ecosystem and all living beings and all future generations, like genetically engineering the DNA out of everything. So I would like to encourage you to use this opportunity to make a commitment of whatever it is in your mind about what you can do. Whether it's to see a movie, or show a movie, or talk about it, or get the series, which is going to be riveting, because I talk about the dangers in much more detail as part of my questions, because you have to know what the dangers are in order to understand how to fix it. So you get deep dive into the dangers and also the fixing. So whatever it is, I would like to suggest that you make that commitment tonight, because being involved with behavior change, I have helped inspire 50% of Americans now concerned about GMOs. The tipping point has started. The food companies are getting rid of them, but now we also need to go to organic because of its being sprayed. So I do know from a behavior change standpoint that the people who are most successful in making changes to long-standing unhealthy habits are those that make the commitment at the time that they're inspired. So if you've been inspired by anything that I've said or anything that you've seen, please don't go to bed tonight without mulling over what it is that you want to commit to. Even if you don't know, you can commit to having a session to make that decision. But if some commitment happens tonight, then the chances of your success will be increased dramatically. So that's my closing statement. Thank you very much. Safe eating.